being here.
Oh. I'm Vicki Julian. I've been a member of Kansas Authors Club since 2008, 2009. For 5 years, I was a financial secretary for the organization. And I was so thrilled when other people finally took that over. It was very interesting. I got to know a lot of people, and I'm so glad to see some new faces here that I didn't know. So glad to have you. First question, what do all the best-selling authors, famous ones, have in common?
Good editing, I'd say.
Absolutely, Barry. And that is absolutely correct. Good editing. When we talk about what an editor does, there are a number of things. Number one, an editor is going to catch your typos, going to catch bad grammar, going to catch your punctuation. They're going to catch your content. They're going to catch any inconsistencies. If they see something that could be made better, they're going to share that with you. The editor has one job, and that is to make your book the best it can be. So it's tough to turn your writing over to another person. It really is. And I can completely relate to that. But we're going to get into why you need an editor, the pitfalls, how to choose an editor, and then I'm going to give you my personal thoughts on editing. So why should you edit? It's a matter of, it's hard to edit your own work because you see what's supposed to be there. I just cringe sometimes when I'm texting and it's auto-populated and come up with something that just doesn't make sense at all. I don't know if you all have been in that situation, but I have. But asking friends and family to look at your work and considering that editing doesn't work. And I'm going to give you case in point. First book I ever did, or actually this was the second one. It was called How to Make This World a Better Place. And I was so excited about this book. I wanted people to read it. And I even had a pastor do a little bit of editing. It's unobtrusively, but I had him do some biblical editing. So I get my books, and I didn't get very many at the beginning, but I get my books. I published on Amazon, and I'm looking at this one particular portion, and I've used the term sum of money. Now it's in the book, and it's on the back cover. Guess what? One was SUM and the other was SOME. And I wouldn't have made that mistake except that I think the autocorrect did it for me. And talk about embarrassing, but do you know at least 10 people read that and didn't even notice? And so when family and friends, one of the pitfalls too, and having family and friends, it doesn't help you if somebody just reads your work and goes, oh, that's so wonderful. I had two sisters, you know, I appreciated their encouragement, their praise, but I have another sister who is actually an editor and a writer, and she and I trade off editing each other's work. And there's something that catches the eye of either one of us. We are honest with the other person. We're encouraging. There's a difference between encouragement and praise. People who love you are going to say nice things. They're not going to say anything negative. An editor is going to be honest with you. And sometimes you're going to have a little bit of a thick skin because there are things that happen. Like, have you ever written a sentence that you think is so darn good you're gonna get that in the book no matter what. Or even if it doesn't fit. An editor's going to tell you, oh, that's a really great sentence, but it really doesn't belong here. So you have some things along that line. And here, one of the things here too is that you'll write a sentence and you know what you're trying to say. And you think, golly, that sentence is really good. Everybody's going to get it. And if I have to read it over 2 or 3 times, it's not a good sentence. And it's not going to be a good sentence for your reader. I'm one of those people. I look at books differently. An editor will look at your manuscript differently than what other people will. Number one, if it's a typo, it's going to jump out at me. I just am so disappointed for an author if they have a whole lot of mistakes in a book. It's not enough to have good content. You've got to make sure that your book respects the reader enough that you have the proper grammar, you have the proper spelling, you don't have the inconsistencies. I've seen a number of books where it'll be an unusual first name of the character and it's spelled differently. I've even seen situations where somebody will use a particular name and they mean the same person, but they've given them a different name later on. So you do have things like that. Now there's software that will help on that type of thing. But honestly, I think live editing is probably the best thing. Now, I will tell you, not every editor is for every manuscript. When I read, I'm an avid reader, but yet last year I was so busy with editing that I only read 2 books. So when I accept an edit manuscript, a manuscript to edit, it's got to be something I'm interested in. And I guarantee you, I love doing that because I may be the first person who really gets to read the next bestseller. And actually, I do have a book that I edited out on Amazon that was a bestseller in its category. And it's still, 5 years later, it's still one of the top 100 to 150
Books.
rated. And are any of you familiar with Dave Ramsey? Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
Okay. We were able to obtain an endorsement from Dave Ramsey on this book. Yes, yes. I think she's one of them. But I will tell you, this book, I don't believe would have gotten an endorsement. It wouldn't be where it is today had we not done some editing. There's a lot of back and forth. Number one, organization is extremely important. You have to make sure that it follows something logical. Sometimes I run into situations where I will say that bibliography isn't done correctly, but somebody insists upon keeping it that way. That's great, but it may knock you out of an award. Recognition may harm your readership. And so we want to make sure that everything is consistent, it's organized, it's readable, and that it's really the best it can be. That's the whole goal. So when you are doing, when you're doing something and when you are engaged with an editor, you need to make sure that that editor respects your style of writing. Everybody has a style. And you want to make sure that the integrity of your writing is preserved. Now, if you've got weird sentence structure, if you've got
She's talking about me.
Well, you're not the only one. But I have seen sentences that are more than 50 words and they've got comments all over the place. By the time I get to the end of that sentence, I haven't a clue what it was about. And it's easy, it's very easy to do. Another thing that I see often is somebody will try to do, they'll try to use a comma in place of a conjunction. And sometimes a conjunction is better if you consistently see that. One thing that drives me crazy is if I see the same word over and over and over and overused. The English language takes on a little different style. How many of you remember in your English class, your English teacher saying, when you were doing a possessive and it ends in S, you use one apostrophe. Now, do you know today they're doing an apostrophe S on the end of it? So that's changing.
Like Ross.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like
Right.
Ross, because it was just one Ross, yeah.
Absolutely. And if it ended in something like my grandson's name is Maddox. And if it sounds like an S or whatever, just doing one. It's kind of the same way that when you are typing in a sentence, we used to leave 2 spaces between the next sentence. We don't do that. So
Please don't. Please
We
don't.
But
We don't.
it's so hard
Even in
to
your, even
break.
in your
It's
novels and
taken
stuff.
years to break.
Then I have to clean it all out of my editing software.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's so hard.
Had
It
no
is very
idea.
hard.
Disaster.
It is very hard. So there are things that change. I still won't tell somebody that I'm nauseous. And I'm nauseated. My father was one who was very particular about the English language. And you didn't do that. You didn't say somebody was fair complected. That was a no-no. So there are things that are changing. And you want to make sure that when you select an editor, that editor is aware of what is acceptable and what is not. I'm kind of a traditionalist. So, as Mickey will tell you, by the way Mickey and I met is I edited her first book. And we became friends and we wanted to do something, work together. And we did these wonderful biography, memoir
Right.
workshops. Well, it wasn't lucrative. I don't think we actually earned anything, but no worries on taxes that year. So what we decided to do, we separated on our interests. I love editing. I absolutely love it. I love it almost as much as writing. And well, maybe equal. And Mickey is so good at publishing and doing that. So we both took our own little specialties and decided to work together. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a thought. I use an editor, as I told you. I use my sister. She's a pro. I don't use her because she's my sister and she's free because we reciprocate. But I use her because she's good. And she always tells me the truth. If she reads something and says, Vicki, I think a better word would be, I'm going to listen to her. She's a former journalist. And she used to write a little article, if any of you are around Lawrence or whatever, it was called Jest for Friends. And she did that for a number of years. So she's done that. She's written history. She's written the history of Lawrence High School. She's written the history of Douglas County Bank, which is now Central. central bank in the Midwest. And I know that she's going to give me feedback. And I know that sometimes we tend to use too many commas, and then sometimes we tend to not use enough. And when an editor reads your work, an editor is going to be looking at that. An editor is going to be looking at, is there a better word that's used? Sometimes, especially if people are academic and they are very, very good at their specialty, those words the average person won't know. Now, that's fine if the average person isn't going to read your book, but if the average person is, you need to make sure that you are accommodating an average reader too. In college, I will tell you, I didn't edit my work. It was all done up here. I knew before I wrote an essay exactly what I was going to say. It was all organized here. Sat down, wrote it, and it was bad because I was reinforced. So I had very, very good grades. So that was wonderful. But now I know the value of editing. And as they say, case in point, some and some. It was very embarrassing. Let's just say that those books didn't get distributed until I made sure that I made that correction. So now that I know the value of editing, I'm hoping that you all will. And please know, I'm not drumming up business. I've got a lot of things on my plate. And but whoever you choose, make sure that they're the right person for you. I won't do certain genres. Poetry is beyond me. I would not be a good editor for that. And if there's something in a book that I'm not interested in or don't think, because if I'm going to be limited on my time for personal reading, that's what you're going to do for me. I'm going to read your book because I'm interested and I want to really get involved. It kind of surprises me, some of these places like Amazon and different groups, they'll edit your book in 1 or 2 weeks. And there's no
connection.
there's no connection. And my first book was edited kind of that way, except that we did some back and forth. But you need somebody who believes in you. You need somebody who's going to be honest. You need somebody who's going to give you good feedback. You need somebody who knows the rules of the trade. You don't want somebody who doesn't know the difference between when to use me and when to use I. And that happens a lot with what you see in the paper. You hear it on the news. I cringe. And I cringe because we also have something today where I've heard several news anchors go, him and his, and it's just, I'm sure there are a number of the English teachers who are rolling over in their graves. So want to make sure that whoever helps you is somebody who knows what they're doing. So anyway, I'm going to open up to questions.
Do you do editing for esoteric things like compositions?
Sure.
Do you just mostly edit novels?
I've edited novels. I've edited histories. I've edited, let me see, a variety of things. Actually, what's really good is just a variety of things. And one of the things that I did, one of the things that I edited was for, she is a distinguished professor of English at KU. And I edited a biography that she did. and it was a wonderful biography, but I will tell you, this was a tome. 600 and some pages. And it was published by Oxford Press. And we had a lot of things back and forth with that. Every big publisher is going to have an editor too. So there's a difference between an editor that you might have and then an editor that the publisher uses, because they have their own things that they want to do. This poor woman went through 2 different editors. And so why would you have an editor before you send it to a publisher? Because you want to make sure that that manuscript gets their attention.
Right.
And so, but yes, I've done a variety of things.
The only problem I've seen with editing is the cost. If you're living on a low budget, how do you afford that? Do you really need it?
I'm cheap.
Yeah, I know that most editors are,
Most editors aren't.
right. And the cost is like $3 a page sometimes. Is that what I've seen?
Yeah.
If you got a 300-page.
I made less than I did 20 years ago as a corporate director
Wait,
per hour. But I do it because I want to help other people.
yeah,
And like I said, it's so much fun to think that I may be reading the next bestseller. It happens. Sure.
That's the editor. A writer, when he's editing himself, to use the computer's editing prompts? Or do you think they should be disregarded? Because I've seen many mistakes. And I've made tons, and I make them all the time. But I see these mistakes that even me at my minuscule understanding can catch.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if it's just a weak editing program. And so I never feel satisfied with my editing.
Well, you already know my feelings on autocorrect.
that's right. Pay
I,
attention to it and review
Well,
it
I do,
closely.
I do.
the grammar check,
Yeah,
the grammar check.
Well, the grammar check doesn't a lot of times promote the use of like, what do they call that? It's not a comment. I know.
semicolon,
Are you thinking?
semicolon,
Semicolon
Yeah,
or code.
that's where
Yeah.
you break conjunction.
I will tell you, I find probably 90% of the time, I disagree with the grammar check.
Me too.
And it's not something, there are things that will be caught too. I was reading the book of a very prolific author. He lives in Kansas. He's really a good writer, except he's got so many errors. He used the word piqued as like in piqued interest. Guess how he spelled it?
P-E-A-K-E-D.
And grammar's not going to catch that. Autocorrect, spelling check, oh, none of that's going to be caught. So you do have to do some of your own. You're the one who knows what it. Oh, absolutely.
Other questions? Do you have other questions for Vicki?
It depends on how long it is. It can take, it's not a real quick thing. And it depends on how the person wants to do it. I have someone right now who's sending me bits and pieces and she remembers things, which I don't really like doing that unless they're individual stories.
Because then it fits.
Yeah, it's hard to get the consistency, until you see the entire book. I personally, if someone allows me to, I like to edit, give it to the person, and then have it given back to me to look through one more time, because there are so many things that can be missed. When an editor sends you something and there's tracking on it, it's really important to accept or reject. The reason being is that's going to be coming back, and an editor is going to have to look at that. Did they change that or did they not? And Vicki needs a clean copy. We ran into a little situation where different word programs,
That's right.
it's adding it back and forth. It will add like a character, or it'll add a numeral in front of a sentence, and you're going,
I did that.
that's
How did
not
that get-
there.
Hidden
I didn't
characters
do
in
that.
Microsoft Word
Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
that show up in other software programs.
absolutely, absolutely. So that's something too. That's one of the reasons you want to make sure that you accept or reject, so that that's out of there. You don't have to look at that anymore. And if an editor looks back, I think Amber, some of the books I've done, the one that I was telling you about, the tome, I bet we spent a good 4 to 6 months on it. Yeah. And if somebody doesn't take time, I mean, I'm picky. I am really, really picky. I want to make sure that the manuscript is as free of errors as possible. And I also want to make sure, like I said, an editor's job is to make your book the best it can be. And that's what I take very seriously. So I'm trying to think of the shortest, maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
That's pretty damn fast.
That's pretty fast.
That's really fast.
Where would you, so you said you're busy, where do people find it? Because I've never tried to do
That's
that
a good
before. I'm
question.
usually the editor people.
Yeah. It's really interesting. There are lulls.
There's what?
There are lulls
Oh.
within the editor. I mean, I have right now, I'm getting these piecemeal
Yeah.
things from one individual. I've got another individual. I just finished a teacher's guide, and I will tell you, I'm still banking on this being a bestseller. It's a very, very good book, and it's one of the people actually who is in this district too. And the book is called How to Be Happy Being You. And this particular one, I talked him into writing it separately for adolescents versus adults. 2 different things. He was trying to merge the 2 together. Doesn't work. And it's an excellent book. It's an excellent book to discover your feelings and teaching how to do anger management, teaching how to react in life, that type of thing. It's the perfect book to give to any adolescent who's contemplating suicide or contemplating doing some heinous crime. It's also a book for normal teenage angst, just how to cope with it. And it's if it gets in the right hands and all, this book is a bestseller. So I can usually tell. And
I would offer one thing about finding an editor, and that is be careful.
See, that's my concern.
I would
you
get-
know,
I would
wouldn't
make
wanna just go
sure-
out and average, you know.
I would not go to an editor without talking to someone that they had edited,
Yes,
because I made that mistake.
yeah.
I would talk to somebody that they had
She doesn't
actually
mean
edited
me.
it, but I do not mean, I absolutely do not mean Vicki. I would definitely talk to someone that they've edited, go
So maybe
find the
talk to other
editor.
people that publish. saying.
who
edited
that
the
editor
book
has
or-
edited their books. Was it to work with that editor? Were there problems with that editor? What was the issue? And, you know, because it really, if you do, as Vicki said, if you run into an editor that you're not on the same page with, or they're not good at editing,
Or they're
you're
too
gonna
busy.
be real unhappy with your
Or they're too
results.
busy and
It's
therefore.
be
they're
like
too
anything else
spread
you
out.
spend a lot of
So
money
they
on.
can't give a
you
lot
know,
of
you don't get
attention to
references.
your individual.
That's right. There's people here that have this experience of bad editing, and bad editing is no fun.
No,
So there's just my 2 cents worth. I'm not sure where to find them, Vicki. I don't mean to interrupt you.
right.
Do you just talk to
If,
authors?
if
or-
you, sure, if anyone wants to give me a manuscript or whatever, don't hesitate, because that, as I say, there are lulls in between. Last year, I had probably only 4 weeks out of the whole year that I didn't have a book to edit, because we were between, I was giving edits to somebody and they had to do theirs. So, and we're sending it back. So there are times where I can do something like that. Now, nobody's asked me, what do you charge?
I was.
My rate now is 35 an hour. And so I'm not not an extremely slow reader, don't worry about that. But I do read every word. And so I make sure that whenever I do an editing job, that it's going to be something that I really looked over. Now, that doesn't mean I might not miss something. You can't pick up a book, even from the best-selling authors today, without finding an error in it. But I can tell you that
Right.
if you publish a book and it's got error, you don't lose it. I don't care how good the content is, but it's just something, if you've taken that long a time to write something, you need to make sure that it's really readable.
Yeah, for like the best-selling authors that I read, and I find little things once in a while, but it's pretty rare. It's like 1 or 2 things in a whole
Right.
novel that you'll know.
Absolutely.
Not very much.
Absolutely.
Other questions?
If I did something like.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Vision.
Intended. Is that?
That tells you your words.
You want to make sure, that whatever you're putting out there is readable. And so, yeah,
The idea of punctuation, paragraph, order and outline order, especially stories. Stories, beginning, middle, and end. If you don't know how to get that, if I read it and I interpret it, and I know what it is. Because someone else and they read it and it doesn't give you or a rival, then don't you realize that your editing is.
Yeah. The problem, depending on who else reads your work, like I said, there's a difference. The editor's going to look at your work differently than what a friend or family member will. They're not looking at the best word to use. They're not looking at telling you, they're not going to tell you, oh, I didn't understand that sentence.
Right.
So
We're gonna be looking for type of fluctuation, content,
Yeah.
inconsistencies.
Right.
and Ideas to make it better.
right, absolutely.
So Vicki, what are the top mistakes what are the things you end up correcting over and over and over in everybody's writing, not just mine?
No, Mickey was a good sport, I will tell you, because if I said, Mickey, we need to get rid of one of these comments. He was like,
I'm giving you my comment, that's what I
And
mean.
so, but I actually saw one sentence that was 70 some words with just commas. No, no.
Oh,
it
that wasn't me?
Mickey.
Okay, good.
It wasn't Mickey.
Mine was only 50.
I think using the same word over and over and it gets boring. And I know today that there is a style of writing where it's like, you don't say words like he agreed or whatever. He said, she said, he said. You know, if I read 3 of those right after each sentence, it just stands out at me. I'm bored. There's so many great words in the English language.
Would that be redundant?
Yeah, very redundant. So, so that's one thing I would still encourage people to
Look at it differently.
look at it. Yeah, a little differently. There's nothing that 20 years from now, when your book is written, that may have been passé to say she said she had. So do what sounds right. Write like you speak. To me, you know who my favorite author is? I love John Grisham. I absolutely love him because he writes it. He said he is not the greatest writer in the world, but he writes to entertain. And that's what you want. You don't want a reader who's having to read your book. You want a reader who wants to read your book. And so that's what you're doing. I think most of us want to entertain, unless we're writing a history book and that we want to sell to other colleges or high schools or whatever. But
Just hits me different when I'm working with
mhm.
and a copy, like in editing, even my own writing, it reads different when I'm behind my computer. Do you notice something like that? Like, because it's so easy to make a change, or I'm gonna make that change, make a change. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering how that affects you. You ever do paper copies? How do
I
you-
prefer not doing paper copies because sometimes if you are suggesting a rewrite of a sentence, there's not a whole lot of room to show that. And comments and, right. So, but Mickey was asking about common errors. Other than redundancy, I sometimes, well, the commas, the punctuation is a big one. How you read something. Do you remember the t-shirts that say, let's eat, grandma? And if you don't put the comma in the right place, it changes the whole intent. And just too many commas, too long a sentence. You don't want constantly abrupt sentences, but at the same time, you don't want something that's on and on and on and on, because you'll lose what you're trying to say. Any other questions?
How do you feel about, I think you already mentioned this, people that want to use literary language and maybe overuse it? What kind of advice
Yeah.
do you give to people that do that and when you catch that in editing? You guys know what I mean?
What do you mean?
What do you mean, like the biggest words? Or-
Lots of big fancy words.
Yeah. When I see a lot of that, it's like, are you trying to impress somebody with your vocabulary? If it's germane, it's like putting gratuitous sex, violence, and language. I'm not a prude, but I will tell you, it shows. You know what? I have turned off certain movies because I get tired of, I'm counting the times, how many times the F word was used. If it's like every other sentence, it's like, come on, really? I don't know anybody who talks like that. Maybe the screenwriter did, but I don't know anybody who does that. It just, when something pounces out at me so much, it loses me. And I'm focusing more on that redundancy than I am the other. There's another person whose books I really like, but he throws in gratuitous sex that isn't even, it's not even plausible. And it's bad. I mean, it's bad. It detracts from his book. And I just want to say, don't do that, don't do that. But so the language, the sex, the violence. There's a show. Has anybody watched or read The Hunger Games? Oh my gosh, I love that series. I love how she, the author, writes. Now there's a lot of violence in that, but that violence is there for a reason. I can handle that. I can handle it really well because there would be no novel if the violence weren't there.
Yeah.
So,
It has a purpose.
so, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's interjecting things.
I have a question, going off the last question. I'm one of those people who has a hard time not by mimicking other authors when I'm writing.
Mhm.
And a lot of the authors I read are a lot of old-fashioned writers. So if you end up in a situation where you've read all these authors from like 100 years ago,
Mhm.
and that's the style that's in your head when you're sitting down to write something, but you're not living 100 years ago, and so your style isn't a perfect match for something that's old-fashioned. Is that really stand out at somebody when they're reading it if your style's a mishmash of like modern and old-fashioned?
It depends. I would have to actually see it
Okay.
to know if it's something that would be distracting.
Would have to be how it works together.
Right, right. Do you know something that I know about myself and what I do? I use the word that too much, too much. So whenever I'm writing anything, I do a word search for the word that. And I look at it every time I've used it. And sometimes
I think that I may be in the same category.
it's like, is that necessary? That this time it was, but
And it's how we all use language ourselves
yeah,
that
You're
will
just
influence what
developing
we
your
write.
own voice,
And
and that's
sometimes
what we all
that is-
do.
that-
We all,
Correct.
so you're mixing you with
Correct.
what you read, which is what we all do, right?
No.
the whole thing is, we know what we're trying to impart. We know what we want to say. The clue, the real issue is making sure that other people
Yes,
know
but the
what
read.
Right.
You know, I was thinking the same.
Any
thing.
other
We can get
questions
out-
for
we can
Vicki?
move-
Like I
I
read
mean, let
tons
you
of
get out. She's gonna,
modern
she's
poets.
gonna get out here.
Poets, writers, and every day I get a.
Going
And I
once?
find that my poem,
Mary, she's gonna speak.
oh, excuse me, it's good for like the ones that were around the turn of the last century. It's been down.
Do we have other questions? Anybody else?
It's very helpful.
Awesome, Vicki, thanks.
My pleasure.
Do you have a
Vicki,
card?
It's depressing.
Oh,
How do you contact?
would you mind, I was gonna say, would you
You're
mind
gonna get
giving us
bunch of
a
business now.
brief biography and your contact information? Because I'm gonna put this on YouTube.
sure.
Don't give your phone number, but give your
Email.
your
You're
website.
working, you're
Give your
working
website
website.
address and
Website.
your biography about the books you've written and stuff.
Okay. I've written 11 books. I've got 8 stories in Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Mhm.
I have done well, a number of anthologies. I wrote the book for the 150th anniversary of Trinity Lutheran Church. It was fun. I don't want the standard anthology. I like something a little different. So guess what? Mickey and I interviewed the members of the congregation, some of whom had been there their whole lives. And I asked questions like, what was the most significant thing you remember about Christmas service? How long have you been there? Of course, has to be a question, but what do you remember most about Sunday school? Just those kind of things, because that's history. That's history, but it's living history, which makes it a lot more interesting than some sort of boring chronological date type thing. I wrote the history of, oh, here we go, we're gonna date me. I wrote the history of my high school's 50th reunion. And I didn't ask people, oh, well, what are you doing? Well, I did ask, what are you doing now? But I wanted to know, what did you think you would be doing when you got out of high school? And what did you do? What is your mantra? What do you consider your philosophy of living?
Right.
And those type of questions. I love that. I also did one called If It Hadn't Happened to Me. I love anthology. Students that sold did that for me. But if it hadn't happened to me, can you guess what it was about? You know, those weird things that can't be explained sometimes. I find that most people have had some sort of experience they don't want to share because they don't want people looking at them like, are you a little bit off or whatever? And it was a wonderful opportunity to bring that together. And I only asked people who I thought would be credible. But I got some very strange things, and I still look at some of them with a little bit of skepticism. But boy, that was a fun book to write. And so, anyway, as I told you, I always got very, very good grades with English and writing essays and such. The only thing that happened to me was my sophomore year, composition and lit. We had to go ahead and do some sort of essay. And he wasn't a professor, he was like a local assistant. And it was a midterm. And he gave me a D. And I went in and talked to him. And he said, well, your writing is verbose. And I'm going, it's verbose? And he said, yes. You know who his favorite author was? William Faulkner. And I'm verbose. So
Yeah, no kidding.
so anyway, I didn't get a D out of that. I wound up getting a C+ or something like that. But that's the only time that ever happened to me.
What did you want to do when you got out of high school? What was your goal?
I was going to be a doctor.
Ah,
And so what changed that, Steve Julian, my husband, we'd known each other since 7th grade, and we had an advanced English class, second semester freshman year. And we were dating other people, but those ended, and that summer we started dating. So worked out really well. I had him for 33 years before cancer decided to meet. So you were asking, so
How do we contact you? How do people contact you?
okay, that's it. Best way to contact me is Vicki Julian at sunflower.com. It's VICKI Julian, it's all one word, JULIAN at sunflower.com. And you can Google me. Just know that it's best if you put my middle initial L in there. You know how you can Google your name periodically? I found a Vicki Julian who was blogging about her drug addiction. Not
Same
I.
thing.
I also found one who wrote a book on diaper and potty training. Well, that one could have been me. I was a preschool director for almost 8 years before I went into the corporate office as director of parent relations. So
But you don't have your middle initial in that. It's just
not
Vicki
that,
Julian.
yes, not in that. But you're welcome to Google me. You'll see all different kinds of things. I've written a couple of articles for the Journal World. And one was about sending
Excuse me.
ashes, my husband's ashes into space. So that, it was fun. It was fun. So that's, let me give, said an awful. Okay,
Okay, all right, thank you, Vicki.
yes,
Thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you.
Good job.